This podcast is able to continue because of the paid members at decodingtv.com. Over at decodingtv.com, we're covering other TV shows like Andor, She-Hulk Attorney at Law, as well as The Lord of the Rings of Power, with more on the way. We'll have a lot to announce soon. But in the meantime, thanks so much to everyone at decodingtv.com who makes A Cast of Kings possible. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cast of Kings, an unofficial recap podcast about the HBO original series, House of the Dragon. I am David Chen, and I have not read Fire and Blood, the book on which House of the Dragon is based.
And I am Kim Renfro, and I have read Fire and Blood, the book upon which House of the Dragon is based.
Welcome to the podcast. On today's episode of A Cast of Kings, we're going to be covering Season 1, Episode 9 of the show, the penultimate episode of the first season. The episode is entitled The Green Council. It's directed by Claire Kilner, written by Sarah Hess, written for the screen by Sarah, or written for television, I think is what they say in the opening credits.
On the credits.
But we will spoil everything through Season 1, Episode 9. We will not be discussing anything from future week's episodes. That includes anything from the books or the next time on preview. You can find more episodes of this podcast at acastofkings.com. Email us at acastofkings@gmail.com. And find us on YouTube and TikTok and Twitter at A Cast of Kings. Before we get into today's episode, there's a bunch of little announcements I want to make. First of all, typically, we record this podcast early Monday morning. And by that time, the episode has had a ton of time to marinate, mostly in Kim Renfro's head, because she's the one that has all the information that we desire, and partially in my head as well. And so what emerges is what I consider to be a relatively polished recap of the episode. Now, some people might scoff at that and say, that's your definition of polish, David Chen? But for me, it is. For me, that's what it is. We are not recording on Monday mornings this week. We are actually, due to scheduling reasons, we're recording on Sunday night, so right after the episode is aired. So if things are a little bit more scruffy,
adrenaline fueled,
if they're a little bit more scraggly, a little bit rough around the edges, that's why. We are not recording as our usual schedule this week. So just letting you know, if the energy is different this week, that's why. I wanted to reiterate what I said last week about this podcast and what our current plans are, which is that our current plan for Cast of Kings podcast is for the feed to go relatively dormant until the next season of House of the Dragon comes out. But we will be recording intermittent bonus episode updates. So be sure to keep subscribed. Whenever there's like a big announcement, I'll try to hop on the mic with Kim and we'll talk about it and put it on a Cast of Kings podcast, a podcast feed. So just as FYI, we also are planning to do for the main feed. I mean, we've been doing bonus episodes for the decodingtv.com feed this whole time, but for the main feed, we also plan to have at least one post-mortem episode after season 1, episode 10. So that's something you can look forward to and be ready for on your podcast feed. Is after our recap of season 1, episode 10, there's going to be at least one additional episode with me and Kim where we kind of talk about the season, read your emails at acastofkings@gmail.com, and so on. So feel free to write in and, we'll respond to a lot of people's thoughts and a lot of writing and other things will come out in the wake of the finale, a lot of think pieces. So we'll try to talk about those kinds of things in the post-mortem that happens at the after season 1 is over. So look forward to that. I got a DM from a listener this week named Barbara. Barbara writes in, hi, David. I really enjoy listening to A Cast of Kings. Side note, me too. I enjoy the podcast as well. Okay, going back to Barbara. Really like how you structured it, and I'm wondering if you know of something similar for the Lord of the Rings show. I like having a host who's familiar with the lore of the series and has read the books, and a host who has not read the source material. Anyway, if you see this message, please let me know. End quote. So Barbara is pointing out something really astute, which is that I am terrible at marketing my own podcast, apparently.
No.
Because literally that podcast that Barbara is talking about exists. It is on the, A Cast of Kings is a Decoding TV podcast. If you're a paid member to Decoding TV, you get a bunch of podcast benefits for different podcasts. And one of those podcasts is the main Decoding TV flagship podcast. We are covering Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power with Don Marshall, who is a book expert. And apparently people have been able to get through A Cast of Kings and not know that. So that's my bad. But go to podcast.decodingtv.com and you will see the Decoding TV podcast, which is currently covering multiple shows, including The Rings of Power, with a Lord of the Rings expert. So I told Barbara this via DM, and she was very excited about it. But if you want to hear a similar dynamic to me and Kim in terms of a book reader versus non-book reader, check out podcast.decodingtv.com. We just finished recapping the season finale of The Rings of Power, and it was explosive. It was explosive, that conversation. So
See what you did
check
there.
it out. Podcast.decodingtv.com. Okay. Finally, there was a couple of things that happened last week in last week's episode of the show that I wanted to follow up on. All right.
Mhm.
So obviously, you should assume we're spoiling at this point through season 1, episode 9. We did get a few emails from folks saying that I complained somewhat heavily, and you joined me a little bit, Kim,
I did.
in talking about how, wow, kind of a big Shakespeare, like a huge misunderstanding to hinge major events on, right?
Yeah,
To hinge at least the events of this episode on, right?
totally.
That Alicent misunderstood what Viserys was saying. Viserys was talking about Aegon the Conqueror. He was not talking about Alicent's son, Aegon. And I think we had said, like, there's too many of these kinds of misunderstandings of the show. A lot of people wrote in and basically said they intended for House of the Dragon to be Shakespearean, and these kinds of misunderstandings happen in Shakespeare a lot. Romeo and Juliet being one of the main examples, where, spoilers for Romeo and Juliet, but at the end of the play, Juliet thinks that Romeo's killed himself, but he hasn't killed, or the other way around. Sorry,
Yeah,
Romeo
yeah.
thinks Juliet is dead, but then so then he kills himself, but then she wasn't actually dead. She just taken some drug,
Yep.
And I think it's a fair call out. And also, I talked to my friend and colleague Jeff Kanata about this, and he was like, "Yeah, Viserys does give off big King Lear vibes, which is true." So I do want to acknowledge that. I did text this to you, Kim Renfro, and you were like, "Let's wait and see how this all plays out before we conclude about how Shakespearean House of the Dragon really is." But I guess I just want to mention it because I thought it was a good parallel, and
Yeah.
we'll see how it plays out. Yeah.
I thought you were about to say I texted you and your response was, "Well, it bothered me in Romeo and Juliet too." Which it did when I was like a freshman in high school. So
No,
there's
I would
that.
I would dare not publicly out your views on Romeo and Juliet here.
No,
But
no, I'm doing that all by myself.
yeah.
But yeah, I did. I was literally like, I want to sleep on it. I'm very curious to see like what Alicent does with that misinterpretation in this episode. And I have to say, I was extremely pleasantly surprised to see how they decided to characterize everything. So
Interesting. Well, I wanted to acknowledge, that response to the criticism.
yeah,
I'm not, when I hear it, I'm not like, oh yes, of course it's Shakespearean, that solves everything. Like there's
no, it's
still
a really
other,
good perspective to have.
agreed. It's a really good perspective to have, but I think, I mean, worth noting as we head into it, and a good lens to view the show. I don't know that I still think it's a completely legitimate viewpoint to be infuriated by, the end of last episode, but I understand people's perspective on the Shakespearean thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is there was some debate between you and me, Kim, about the final moments of last episode. Paddy Considine's character Viserys says "my love" as he's kind of reaching up towards the ceiling, and it's an open question as to who he's talking about. I posited that it was Emma. Paddy Considine has since posted on Instagram, and actually, before I read this, I do just want to say, like, when I record the podcast with you, Kim, I do spend some time reflecting on, like, how did I do, in the podcast, reflecting on, did I communicate all the points I wanted to get across, or was I articulate, etc. And I think if I wish I had done something a little bit better last episode, it was to praise Paddy Considine more. I thought I did that, but I'm not sure if I did that enough, because it really was a very compelling depiction of a person at the end of their life, of a slow and drawn out death, the kind that we rarely see depicted on screen in general. And it was a remarkable performance. And again, despite many of my issues this season, like, it's a towering episode, a towering performance, a towering moment. that was deeply moving, and I was moved by it as well. So, like, to the extent that I didn't fully convey that, I do regret that. But I'm taking the moment right now to correct the record and say I really thought he was wonderful last episode, and I thought I did, but just reiterating in case.
I don't think there's ever no such thing as too much praise for
Mm-hmm.
someone who has clearly poured so much into a character the way that Patty Considine did. It's fantastic.
Patty Considine posted on Instagram. Yeah, and I should say, like, there was an outpouring of praise. He was trending on Twitter, like, after last episode, and he posted on Instagram a quote, an image of King Viserys and Emma from the first episode. And the caption reads, quote, "Thank you for the kind words. I cannot reply to every comment, but I'd like to acknowledge that they haven't been lost upon me. It was an incredible adventure where I made lots of new friends that will be with me for the rest of my life. I'd like to thank the creators for allowing me the freedom to make Viserys my own. I've never loved a character so much. I want to give massive love and respect to Brooke Cyan, who came in only for a few days, but changed the course of my character with her brilliant performance and commitment to the work." That's the actor who plays Emma,
Yeah.
I think, right?
Yeah.
The impact stayed with me until my final improvised words. She unlocked the missing piece of the puzzle for me and allowed my story to come full circle. From the moment she dies, so does Viserys. It was a love story. That's the secret I carried with me. As sick as he gets, he never himself demands any cure. He quietly accepts his suffering, never forgiving himself for putting his beloved wife through such torture in her final moments. Viserys was a gift. I am so honored he found me. Now, no more. End quote. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful caption.
Also, just in case I didn't mention it on this podcast before, I don't know if I did. Patty Considine was one of the only of the core cast members who did not need to audition for the show.
Yeah.
He was literally just selected for the role, and I can't, just beautifully done all around.
Yeah. He does also confirm that the words that he said at the end were improvised, and also that they were about Emma. So
yes.
That is worth noting as well.
Yeah. Honestly, if you reading that caption, listening to it, if you just go back and rewatch that scene, I feel like for as effective as it was without knowing that context, having that insight to his performance and how he kind of crafted all this stuff, just lovely.
There is one other point I wanted to make about Patty Considine's character is I think that I have had many issues with the time jumps, as have many other people, but the show is viewed it can be interpreted and looked at really differently if you view Patty Considine's character Viserys as the protagonist of the first season, right? Or most of the first season, right? Like if he is the protagonist, then all the time jumps make complete sense. Like he's the character with which you're viewing the lens through which you're viewing the rest of the show, and you're kind of seeing the full scope of his life, his self-imposed suffering to some degree, as indicated in the caption, his desire for peace and collegiality between members of his family, but his inability or unwillingness to do the things that will allow for peace or create peace, to make the difficult decisions, and to see the consequences that over time is really compelling. Now, I think the show is not really structured like that, because obviously we spend a ton of time with Rhaenyra and Alicent, and so he's not really the true protagonist. But it did kind of give me this different lens with which to view the show of oh wow, if Viserys is the protagonist, then this time jump stuff really makes a lot of sense and is a really fascinating, unique way to look at this character's life and what that character's perspective is. So
right.
Yeah,
starting with the prologue, we get the moment that he is named heir to the Iron Throne all the way through to his dying breath in the first season,
right,
of the show.
So it's just this really vast expanse of time that the show allows us to look at because of and it's only made possible because of the time jumps.
Yeah.
In praise of time jumps as well, I have to say, I'm spoiling a little bit of this week's episode of the podcast, but just Olivia Cooke is just crushing it this season, and if the time jumps allowed us to have Olivia Cooke in the show, it was completely worth it, in my opinion. She's just bringing so much intensity and rage, and indignation to this performance, that it's really remarkable. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm not saying, again, the actress who played young Alicent was not incredibly talented as well, which she was,
Yeah.
which they were.
Emily
But
Carey was great, I think, for what we needed out of the younger, slightly less ground down version of Alicent that we had in the
totally,
first half season, in order then for Olivia Cooke to pick up that mantle and run with it the way that she did.
totally. So those are all the pre-episode thoughts, but you can always email us, let us know what you think of the show at acastkings@gmail.com, or find us on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube at acastkings. Obviously, we look at a lot of the feedback and we talk about it at the beginning of the show. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to discuss Season 1, Episode 9 of House of the Dragon. Season 1, Episode 9 of House of the Dragon. The Green Council, directed by Claire Kilner, written by Sarah Hess. Opening credits. Kim, what's different this week?
I was able to decipher more symbols. Yay.
Woo!
I still think that this is a little bit more complicated than it always needs to be, but hey, it's fun when I can get it without expending too many brain cells. So yeah, this is, as far as I can tell, the first time that we have seen not only Alicent's symbol, but her children, and now she has grandchildren. Not sure if everybody caught that, but she is a grandmother now. Pretty wild. We have a whole new generation of Targaryen kids. So yeah, so her little symbol is the high tower sigil, which is like that the tower with the flame over the 7-pointed star of the Faith of the Seven. So like very in line with this costuming that we've seen on her for the last couple of episodes, where she's very wrapped in the mantle of her faith, representing the green of Hightower. And then, well, okay, I'll talk about the kids that we all know about first for their symbols. So we get the 3 circles representing Aegon, Helena, and Aemond, her 3 children that she had with Viserys that we've come to know over the last few episodes. Helena's little circle seems to be a spider. We also saw Helena embroidering a spider in this episode. She just likes her critters, and so that is her little symbol, is a spider. Aegon's symbol looks to me like it's a dragon egg and a naked woman, perhaps some sort of allusion to his proclivities in the bowels of Flea Bottom.
Not his non-discriminating proclivities.
Yes, that's what they call it, non-discriminating. And then there's a really obvious blue stone, a sapphire representing Aemond. They haven't really like explain this at all or like shown this in the show, but if you've read the books, you know that there's like in the histories it's claimed that he replaced the eye that he's missing with a sapphire sometimes, like in order to be extra spooky, I guess, when he's not wearing his eye patch. So that's why his little symbol in the opening credits is a blue sapphire. And then there is a 4th bloodline coming away from Alicent and Viserys, because guess what? They have a 4th child that we have not met on this show yet.
Wow.
His name is Darren, and George R. R. Martin last week just like casually threw up a blog post that was like some casual musings about House of the Dragon. This isn't an official statement or anything. He said, but he mentioned that like, oh, of course they've had to like make some adaptation choices. For example, we haven't seen Darren yet on the show. He's over in Old Town hanging out, and like we just couldn't work him into season 1. So I cannot believe that they haven't even done like a throwaway mention of this fact, but there is a 4th child of Alicent and Viserys's in existence in the world, but we just haven't met him yet on the show. However, they did take the time in this opening credits to show that little 4th bloodline, indicating that we'll meet him at some point. Maybe season 2.
Anything else from the opening credits you want to mention?
Oh, well, you see the kids later, but yes, we got a little branch off of Helena and Aegon, so they also have children of their own now. We saw the 2 twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, named after former King Jaehaerys, who was the one who ruled before Viserys.
As much as I like Olivia Cooke in the show, she is 28 years old in real life. So it does kind of strain belief a tiny bit that she'd be a grandmother at this point.
Yeah.
But, whatevs. But yeah, thank you for the breakdown. I was thinking, Kim, that I really do feel like in some ways this show is one that is more built for book readers than Game of Thrones, right? In some ways. And the opening credits is one which, like, from my perspective, are almost completely impenetrable as a non-book reader.
Yeah.
is kind of like a sign of that. And the fact that there's 3 people named Egon and 2 people named Eric and so on, it's something that I need your help talking through each week, and I appreciate it. But it does feel like I do wonder if that was the kind of the mentality when they were like coming into the show, is like, this is for the hardcore fans and for people who are like already into the show. Whereas I feel like Game of Thrones is more like, let's try to like bring people in who are like outside of this world. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, and I think I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before on a main pod, but maybe it was a bonus episode. Either way, go subscribe and listen to all the bonus episodes. They're great.
Yes.
But I do sometimes feel like across all sorts of genres of TV now, that sometimes writers or creators or directors are very aware of the content machine that exists around television too, and there's a little bit of like it sometimes feels like there's a trust expectation of like, well, someone's going to take the time to break this down into all of the little nerdy details that we aren't going to explicitly lay out in this adaptation. So yeah, I agree that it does feel that way so far in this first season.
Let's talk about our overall thoughts on this episode, Kim. What did you think of season 1, episode 9?
So many really good payoffs to things that happened earlier in the season that I loved. And then just some really great surprises for me as well throughout. So I was like watching the episode for the first time. I could feel myself like pulling faces at like, oh my God, are they really doing this? Or, oh my God, that just happened. And like
pulling faces, like you're like physically placing your hands on your face. Is that what you're saying? Or
not pulling faces, like we'll just jump ahead very quickly. The Laris feet situation, which we'll talk about more in depth later, but I could feel like my mouth hanging open.
I see.
And I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And then like I had this like expression of delight on my face when Rhaenys burst into like the dragon pit. Like it was like everything I want normally out of a Game of Thrones or a House of the Dragon episode. I thought it was great. What did you think?
This is possibly my favorite episode of the season so far.
Hell yeah.
I thought it was awesome. I'd give it like an A minus. It's really, really, really good. Largely because of the structure of the episode. Minor point, of course. This is, I think, the least amount of time that has transpired between episodes in the whole season.
Like
I think it's
45
literally like
minutes.
No, because I think it was. It was. It's not clear to me if this was like the same night as last episode or the night after.
I think it's the same.
It's the same because she says I saw him last night before he died, so I didn't know if it was. Yeah.
I think it's like the early morning, the early hours of dawn. So yeah, maybe a matter of hours. Yeah, like so she left at midnight. It's 3:30 in the morning when that kid finds him.
Right, smallest time jump in the whole season. I'm sure it's just coincidental. That's why I really love the episode. But I think that. The episode is structured like a thriller, basically. It's structured like, first of all, there's this great opening scene that takes place almost entirely in real time of this debate in the small council, and seeing Alicent's reaction to that and her indignation is amazing. And then it's like a race against time, to control the situation. I do have minor nits as usual, but overall, this was like a home run episode. I loved it. I was completely engrossed in it. Just really some of my favorite TV that I've seen this year. Like I just thought it was tremendous hour of television. So I had a great time. Loved season 1, episode 9. So let's get into it. The episode opens with the darkness and desolation of the Red Keep. You see like all these various scenes, the small council room, everything's just dark and billowing in the winds. There is a plaintive piano score that plays throughout most of the first sequence where like all this stuff is happening. It's very, very beautiful, as is most of the music for the show and throughout the episode. So there is a small boy that's walking down the hall, and I believe he knows, right? He knows that Viserys is dead. He tells Talia, who is an informant for the White Worm. And we also understand like an informant for Otto Hightower, right? And then Talia tells Alicent, and Alicent springs into action. You notice something about Alicent's appearance, right?
Yeah, I clocked that her like nightgown is sort of a light blue silk. And I think because, especially for Olivia Cook's portrayal of Alicent Hightower, she's been wearing mostly like dark greens and is very like aligned with Hightower. And that blue reminded me so much of the dress that Emily Carey was wearing in the pilot episode when we first meet Alicent and she's just friends with Rhaenyra and she like comes into Queen Emma's room and sort of like hangs out in the back. And I just felt like there was a little bit of symbolism there that like in private by herself, Alicent seems to still kind of like be holding on to that teenage dumb of herself. And then of course when she needs to dress and be the queen, she's in like the very elaborate regal dark greens and blacks that she's gotten used to wearing as queen.
Alicent is deeply upset by the king's death. There's a couple of scenes this episode where she's clearly in mourning. A scene later with the Silent Sisters kind of prepping King Viserys' body. I do like that she has kind of genuine emotion for the king. She probably didn't feel that way her whole life, but by this point they've been together for many, many years, and so of course someone would feel something in that situation. She goes to Otto and explains what was told to her last episode, which is that the king wanted Aegon to be king. Now, obviously that kind of motivates all of the action for the episode, right? Is this deathbed confession. And this is a thing that you and I found a little bit frustrating, that it's like the whole thing is hinged on a misunderstanding. But to be fair, this is something that Otto has been plotting for a long time.
Yeah.
And also Rhaenyra in some ways has been you'll probably get mad at me for this, Kim, but I would say like her sort of claim to her like throne and her progeny is like premised on a similar misunderstanding as well, so like to me it's not, this one is obviously like more, no, actually no, I would say they're both equally kind of these misunderstandings of her, like her children basically is what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. I know. Her claim to the throne is unassailable, but it's like, the whole situation is
yeah.
I just find it interesting that I'm seeing like two characters who are basically, one is a misunderstanding and the other one is a lie, and they're both like deploying these things in the furtherance of their of power. The case can clearly be made that the Hightowers or Team Green is worse and we will make it this episode, in some ways. But anyway, I just for that reason, I didn't mind it as much this episode, because it's like, okay, what, it's all built on lie. It doesn't matter if it's a lie. It's gonna, like, who knows? Otto Hightower might have tried to make a grab for power anyway, even if, it's very possible if there wasn't a thing. So it's like, fundamentally, the misunderstanding doesn't really matter. But we do get this opening scene in the small council where she kind of explains it to everyone. She sees that everyone has been plotting without her knowledge, and she's very upset by that. I think they call it, I wrote it down, but it was like, there was no need to sully you with darkling schemes, one of them says, which I thought was a cool turn of phrase.
Darkling schemes. I thought it was so interesting because I agree with you that it doesn't ultimately matter. Otto was going to do what he does, because in Fire and Blood, this whole Viserys's final last words, the misunderstanding, does not exist. We don't have any insight into like the actual goings on in any sort of last moment between Alicent and Viserys. So I think that it was to me a very important choice to make it clear that Alicent was not in on the Darkling schemes from the get-go. And instead, this misunderstanding is more like, it's just a brutal way to make her directly connected to the motivation for what they're doing. And from anybody from the outside's view, like, we see it happen in real time in the small council room. Like, Lord Beesbury is like, all right, you're telling me the odds, like, you're telling me that the mother of the person that you're about to crown happened to hear this like final plea from King Viserys when nobody else was around. Like, very convenient. Sure, Alicent. But we know that she thinks it's true. And so that affects the way that we see her moving through all of these episodes and sort of starting to flounder as she can't really control what's going on.
In the after the episode bit, I watched not the trailer for the next episode, but like them, them reflecting this episode and how Alicent always wanted the throne for her son, but not like this. Basically, like, she wanted it in a way that wasn't underhanded. She wanted it all above board, and to see this kind of very powerful memory for Alicent being weaponized in this way is upsetting for her. And And I like that because she also believes that King Viserys, despite what King Viserys said, there's no way you can interpret King Viserys's thoughts to be wanting his daughter to be killed. Like
Right.
there's no rational way to interpret that, right? In
Right.
that way. And she brings that up. So
Something I didn't notice until I was actually watching this scene for a third time tonight is because the first time through, I clocked this framing that they had in that small council scene where Alicent is sitting in the main chair, the chair where King Viserys would have sit if he was present for his small council meetings, and she's flanked by Otto and Cole, and she's like looking down. The chair is sort of like beautifully crowning her head. It was very striking to me, and so then I went and I looked at the scene of her in the small council chamber in episode 8 where she was like clearly in control. Rhaenyra and Daemon show up and it's like, oh, Alicent's running the show here. And the contrast between the way that she was holding herself when she believed she was in control of everything, she believed she had a handle on like Viserys's illness, she felt like she was giving orders and they were being listened to. And then this episode, it's like, nah, that was your dad the whole time. He was just letting you think you were running this show. And now they don't need you to be their figurehead for queen anymore. And they now have Aegon that they're going to go crown and then run the realm through him. And like, and so the thing I noticed when I was watching it the third time tonight is that she doesn't speak. She doesn't speak at the beginning of the meeting. Otto's the one who tells everybody else that the king died. He starts going on. The first time that she speaks up is when she hears Tyland say, our long laid plans can now come to bear. And it's like she fully wakes up and she's like, hold on a second. And so like
right.
all of her emotion follows from that like outburst. And it was just so believable to me of like, she doesn't have control over a thing that she thinks she could have control over, because this was never about her getting power. It was always about Otto. And other men in the realm wanting what they wanted, which was a man on the throne next.
I'm just going to throw this out there. If you're going to plan for years to usurp the throne, maybe make part of that plan not exposing that you had a plan to the queen.
I know. But, we know that Tyland Lannister's a big dumb dummy. He says something stupid like every episode. So as soon as he said that, I was like, that was like the stupidest thing you could have just said right there, bro. Like, you could have just like given Otto a wink when Alicent wasn't looking and been like, this is all working out great, pal. But instead, yeah, he totally spilled the beans and then she loses her marbles, rightfully.
There's some great moments. Speaking of marbles, there's great moments in the episode, this scene, right? Lord Beesbury is really upset, and obviously it's a foreshadowing things to come of people not accepting this, as you might think
anticipate.
That you might anticipate that they wouldn't. And so Lord Beesbury protests because the king clearly wanted Rhaenyra to be the ruler, and then you see Sir Criston kind of walk up behind him, and it's a great shot because he's out of focus, and like something terrible is probably going to happen to him. Sir Criston then murders Lord Beesbury right in front of him. There's a confrontation between Criston and the head of the King's Guard. Do you know what's his name again? That guy,
Harold Westerling.
Yeah, Howard Westerling.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And Westerling. I'm honestly, the thing that this whole sequence reminded me of is, people may or may not recall, but when our current sitting president was elected, there was a lot of debate as to whether, like, what would happen if the former president would not surrender power. And I did get kind of, I did think about what these kind of scenarios playing out when that happened, of like, what if the Secret Service is like refuses to accept that like this guy is the new president, and this is kind of like a similar situation where here's a guy who did not like there's clearly differences within the Kingsguard about who should actually have the power, right? And Westerling refuses to kind of accept that the decisions are being made in this room. Sir Criston's clearly allied to Alicent. In what ways? Open question. We'll talk about more later, probably. But anyway, any other thoughts on this small council scene? Like, Otto wants to kill Rhaenyra because he's like, this is the only way we're going to retain power. Westerling refuses to do so. But really what they need to do is find Aegon, which is what most of the episode is involved with. So any other thoughts, Kim?
The last thing I would add about the Lord Commander. I loved that entire scene. I love the contrast between the way that he behaves and the way that Kristen does. And I thought it was really good payoff. Like Sir Harold, the Lord Commander, hasn't really been super forward. Like he hasn't been a very present character in many of the scenes, but I thought it was good payoff for the pilot episode. And we saw that he used to be the sworn protector for Rhaenyra. And it was only after the other Lord Commander died, Harold got promoted to Lord Commander, and then that left Rhaenyra's sworn protector spot open, and that's when she handpicked Kristen Cole. So like the order of how Sir Harold eventually got promoted and the fact that he is like the captain of the Kingsguard effectively, but he used to have a very close relationship to Rhaenyra when she was a child. And it's like, of course, he's watching all this unfold and he's like, I'm not going to go murder
Right.
her. Like, I've known her since not only have I known her since she was a child, but like, this isn't how we do things. And I love that scene for, sprinkling in the morally neutral / good characters of Westeros that are still out there.
Totally. So the priority at this point becomes find everyone who might have a stake in this thing, control the situation, and specifically get Aegon back. So they go to Helena, and I believe they tell her what has happened. Helena mentions the beast is beneath the boards, which is something that she said last episode as well. And this episode, was she talking about this episode at last episode? Maybe, right? Because she was she has prophetic ability, so maybe she's talking about the dragon in this episode, right?
Right. I think that might be true. The other interesting thing about like the line delivery in the scene this time was that the way that she said it and the way that Alicent reacted almost made me feel like this is a thing that she has been repeating like more and more frantically. And so yeah, I do wonder if the dragon pit scene was it at the end of the episode with Rhaenys, or if there is still more to come from like why she's latched onto this phrase as opposed to the other ones that she used to mention from time to time.
Yeah. So Aegon is not there. And so Alicent wants to find Aegon so she can do what she can to exert control of the situation because she's already seeing it slip away from her. She talks to Sir Kristen Cole, and then also Aemond says he's going to join Kristen Cole in the city to try to find Aegon. There is this moment where Alicent says to Kristen Cole, like right up close to his face, like, I know your loyalty to me and you have to do this for me. And I'm like, what is going on there? Because I understood that Kristen is loyal to Alicent. That makes complete sense. But it almost felt like there might have been a hint of something else going on there. I'm curious what your thoughts were, Kim.
Yeah, when she like gets up in his face and she says, everything you feel for me as your queen. And I was like, are we talking romantic or sexual feelings here? Like I also perked up at that line, but I don't think that they're letting us fully in on whether or not we're supposed to I don't want to assume that they have had any sort of non-queen knight relationship, but you're right to pick up on those vibes.
Sir Kristen has a type, aka people he's guarding, I guess, perhaps. So Otto is making his own play. He finds Eric, whose twin brother is Eric. I'm not even gonna try to like refer to them really throughout the course of the episode.
Should we just call them E and A or something? Like, how do we?
I don't even think it matters. I mean,
okay.
Obviously, one of them has a crisis of conscience in this episode and decides to not follow through with the mission. This was the one note. This whole like Eric subplot was the one note that I felt didn't really work that much for me because it's so rushed and felt a little bit shoehorned in. It's a cool moment at the end when I don't even remember which one, but like one of the Erics decides like, hey, I'm not cool with this anymore. But like we don't know these characters, like we don't know what their opinions are, and so for like one of them to like have this sudden turn, it's really limited in how much impact it can have on me. Just because we just met them and they're barely in the episode. So
I agree. First watch through, I was like, I kept writing down both of their names and being like, one of them's going on. There's this conversation happening, but it was sort of one of my little nitpicks. And it's literally only until I took the time to like write down everything that they're saying, watch it with captions, look at last week's episode. I was like, okay, I know what they're doing in the show now. Eric with an E. The only reason why it's slightly narratively important is that Eric with an E, the one who defects, was Aegon's sworn protector. And I think that it is supposed to tell the audience something, that the knight who has the most close relationship with
Mm-hmm.
this soon to be crowned king is like absolutely not bro. Again, we have like Kristen Cole, Harold Westerling, and then the Erics. We're seeing 4 different interpretations of what a Kingsguard should do when this kind of crisis of succession is happening.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's all that I would remember, is that Eric with the E used to guard Aegon directly, and he's the one who bailed and then tried to help Rhaenys escape.
yeah. Obviously, yeah. The plot function of Eric with an E, uh, is to kind of have him have this crisis of conscience and then get Rhaenys into where she needs to be by the end of the episode, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so they all go out and they try to find Aegon, and that's what a lot of the episode is. And I have to say, Aemond and Kristen, they don't cut a very inconspicuous figure. Aemond, who is incredibly tall with blonde hair and an eye patch, and Sir Kristen wearing a beanie. And a Westeros beanie, you know,
an ill-fitting beanie.
Yeah, it was not a subtle group of guys.
No, they looked like such dorks.
They go to a brothel on Silk Street. They try to find Aegon. Aemond says that he's been taken here by Aegon when he was younger, and then the woman he's talking with is like, "Oh, look how much you've grown." So it's clear like they've interacted before.
Yeah.
But yeah, any we have more thoughts on this search, but any thoughts on sort of this Aegon and Aemond scene before? I'm sorry, Aemond and Kristen scene before we move on.
Just a hard eye roll on Kristen trying to be like, every woman is an image of the mother to be spoken of with reverence. Like,
I do like the through line of like he's clearly like a very religious person in this world, and like that does explain his severe reactions, in the first episode, or a few episodes ago.
I think he's a hypocritical religion loving man, because I'm like, all right, like you can't even allude to the fact that sex exists, but you were just calling Rhaenyra like a spoiled cunt a few years ago. Like,
I mean,
all right, bud.
I mean, Miles McNutt at his newsletter Episodic Medium lays out the case against Team Green, or the Greens, I guess they're referred to in his recent newsletter at episodicmedium.substack.com. He writes, quote, "Even if I feel more sympathy for Alicent's position by the end of this episode than I did previously, I still would have gladly had Rhaenys Dracarys a lot of them. I'd feel marginally bad about Helena with her increasingly prophetic remarks, but I have no real feelings for the rest of them. There's an effort to suggest that Aemond's decency in comparison to Aegon means that he should somehow be more deserving of sympathy, but he's still the one who blew up the dinner last week, and the fact that he's just a walking sneer means I have no actual connection to him. I truly do not understand how the show continues to have Kristen Cole murder innocents in cold blood and yet just prance about the city in a dumb hat. Like we want to see him do anything but die a long, slow, and painful death. Throw in how swiftly Aegon goes from resenting his duty to relishing it the second he thinks he has his dead daddy's love and the adoration of the people. And you have a collection of characters I'd have gladly watched burn as the credits roll, and Alicent, about whom I'd have felt a tinge of tragedy and then moved on with my life." End quote. I do think that the Kristen Cole like murdering innocents left and right, it does bother me. Like, this is just something that's like, does he do that in the books? Like, he can just kill people left and right, like with no repercussions?
Yeah, he does. We kind of blew past this, but the Beesbury thing, it doesn't happen like that. Obviously, those little marble dishes aren't a thing in the books. That was like a show invention. And Joanna Robinson, shout out, former Cast of Kings co-host, totally called that of like, I want to see someone murdered with one of those at one point. And then they decided to have that be the method by which Kristen Cole does. But yeah, he gets away with crap like that in the book because he's in the pocket of Alicent and Otto.
I do wish that they had done a better like I wish there had been some kind of poetic reason why it would have been interesting to murder him that way, like that, because I don't think they ever actually explain explicitly say what the marbles are meant to represent. And it
No.
would have been interesting if the marbles, if they, someone had given some voiceover that was like, these, as a reminder, someone's giving a tour of the small council room. As a reminder, these marbles represent, our fealty to the king and blah, 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 and then for
And
him to be
5
murdered by,
balls we gave to the
right.
men of the small council.
Exactly. Yeah. But like, but then as right now, like Lord Beesbury's murder is just, he's murdered because of set decoration. Like, as
Yeah.
opposed to, there was like, some kind of interesting metaphor about the fact that
Yeah.
he's killed with it. So
In
anyway.
Fire and Blood, there are like the rumored accounts of what happened in that room. Because again, it's like a closed room. So the histories don't exactly know what happened. But it's like one of the rumors is that Kristen Cole just slit his throat at the table. The other one is that he like pitched him out a window and he was impaled on the spikes below the tower. So like they went somewhere in the middle between those gory personal ways of murdering someone and just had him like smash his head down in a fit of rage. Anyways, less Kristen, more Eric and Eric talk.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more talk about season 1, episode 9 of House of the Dragon. While Kristen and Aemond are looking for Aegon, so are the Erics, and we learn a lot about King's Landing, like the fact that it subjects young children to cage fights. Apparently, is this in the books, Kim? I'm curious.
Not that I remember.
Oh,
this
wow,
is
show invention, perhaps.
At least not as detailed as like, oh, we file their teeth and grow their nails out, and we made a Foley artist make the sound of fingers scratching cheek flesh out.
So the Erics discover, or not discover, but I guess they happen upon the cage fights. And then I think it's revealed that one of the kids in the cage fight is a bastard child of Aemond, or Aegon, I apologize. Is that correct?
Yeah, it looked like, or at least like one of the children to be in this cage fighting situation. He looked a little younger and like sitting off to the side, but that blonde kid is in the same way that Robert Baratheon had like bastards all over the city with dark hair and blue eyes, and then Joffrey had them all executed. This was like letting us know like, oh, there's a bunch of little Aegon bastards out there, and someone at least knows about them, including his sworn sword.
But I really kind of like this whole dynamic of cutting between these two characters, and they're like racing against time to try to find Aegon, and I thought that was pretty cool. There is a brief scene, we start to see the Erics have a crisis of conscience, and like, hey, should we really be sticking up for this guy? Because look at all this stuff that's going on. And same thing with Aemond and Sir Kristen, where a lot of Prince Charles energy coming off of Aemond, by the way. Like, I've been watching The Crown, and there's actually many Crown parallels with this episode of House of the Dragon. But yeah, one of them is like, I felt a lot of Prince Charles energy coming off of Aemond, who's like, I'm the one that should be the king, and he's probably right. And this is the thing that was true in The Crown as well. In addition to kind of Prince Charles energy of like, I'm the better one, there's also this dynamic in The Crown where Queen Elizabeth is crowned the queen, but her sister Margaret is theoretically more quote unquote well suited for it. And when I say The Crown, I'm talking about like in real life too. Like these are documented facts. Some of them are. We're like, Margaret is way more like sociable as a person and like more gregarious. Is that what the institution of the crown needs? Not necessarily. And so maybe it fell to the right person, assuming you believe that the monarchy can be a force for good at all, which I am not conceding whatsoever. But point being that like there's this idea of this tragedy that the actual throne falls to somebody who is not suited for it, doesn't want it, when in fact like the sibling is the one who should by all sensible accounts, be the person that gets it. There's a dynamic that happens in real life in The Crown / the British monarchy, also on House of the Dragon as well. So, any thoughts on that, Kim, or anything you want to share about that?
I mean, it just kind of, you saying that at the end there just sparked in my head that was a big dynamic between Tyrion and Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, right? Which is that like Tywin is very strategic, very good at accumulating power and wealth and influence, and yet he cannot see that one of his sons would actually make a fantastic heir to Casterly Rock and is worthy of political strategizing and everything, but instead he can't look past his physical attributes and his proclivities for also the brothels of flea bottom and whatever.
Mm-hmm,
But you know what
mm-hmm.
I mean. Like, yes, that I think that that is a very George R. R. Martin dynamic to bring in, of this like internal family tragedy, structure, abuse network of like one siblings being pitted against one another.
Otto Hightower is really busy this episode. He is trying to control the situation himself by getting a lot of people to swear fealty to his grandson under the new plan. Because, hey, turns out, and I like that they had to explain it multiple times in the episode, and you get to see multiple different people react to it, because
Mm-hmm.
it is a fundamentally silly and implausible thing that's like, guess what, I'm the only person that heard him say this thing that benefits me, and I like that you get to see how like different people react to it,
Yeah.
some very skeptically, and so there's this scene in the throne room where he asks people to swear fealty. And I did think it was cool that they brought up in the small council meeting, hey, we had dozens of houses already swear loyalty to Rhaenyra. And people said, like, that was decades ago. And many of those people are already dead. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that, like, it's true that, like, it was a great scene in the opening. I think it was the pilot episode where they're like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, everyone swear fealty to Rhaenyra. And it's like, oh, yes, this is very sacred bond, blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, it's been decades since then. Most of these people are probably dead. Some of them probably don't even remember. And they could probably very easily switch sides without creating too much problems. And that's kind of the option that's presented to them in this
Right.
episode. So most people do fall into line. There's a couple of houses that don't. One of them is the House of Fell, a woman
Yeah.
representing it, right? Is that like something from the books, Kim Renfro? Or
Yeah. Minor house mentioned in the books. I think they might come into play later, or there's some connection. When I was looking this up, something about House Fell, I was like, I can't talk about that yet on a cast of
okay.
meetings.
I
But good
love that you
catch.
felt I love that you felt that. I love that you felt that. Then there's like I think like a bald guy. What was the guy's what house
Lord
is he from?
Caswell
Lord Caswell, right? Which
is the
house is he
guy.
from?
Uh,
Is it the House of Caswell, or is it?
it's a good question, David Chen.
All right, sorry.
I've just been
Again.
writing him down as Lord Caswell.
Hmm.
The Lord of
Lord
Bitter.
Caswell
Oh,
was the
it
Lord
is.
of
It is
Bitterbridge.
just. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is just House Caswell.
yeah, House Caswell. There you go. And the camera spends a ton of time focusing on him, so he's going to be extremely important in the episode. He does end up bowing the knee to the new line of succession, but then he tries to escape, presumably to warn Rhaenyra because he's still loyal to her. I thought they were gonna I thought Otto was gonna off these people right there, but I think he was still like open
I
to.
also thought that was about to happen.
I think he was still open because I think offing them would definitely be kind of like declaring war right off the bat. But I think he definitely wanted to control the situation so that at least like there was a new coronation before he let them go. I think is kind of how I interpreted it afterwards, because I don't think they would have killed Caswell if Caswell hadn't tried to flee. You know what I'm saying? That was
Sure,
my
but he
interpretation.
also like bent the knee and then didn't really mean it. Like, I think that's why
Mm,
he got
yeah,
the execution
fair enough. Fair
nod
enough.
in this episode that we saw. And I again thought it was like a nice through line of the fact that like that same man, Lord Caswell, was the first person to ever congratulate Rhaenyra on the birth of Joffrey when she was making that horrific like walk up the stairs. He was one of the only people in the court to be like,
Mm.
hello, Princess Rhaenyra, so nice to see you. That's the same guy. So it's like they needed at least one person that we had seen before clearly be a little bit team Rhaenyra earlier in the decades to then be like, okay, that guy's for sure not going to be down with this whole Aegon
Mm.
switcheroo thing.
Wow,
So
great catch, Kim Renfro. Great catch.
I was really rooting for him to make it out of there, and then I was like, no, I was like, ride that horse, go out the fence, you can do
Did
it. And
you
then
not know, like, in the books, is it not clear what happens to him, or?
I think I was hoping that they changed it. I was like, look, he's getting his moment here. He's on his horse.
So he dies in the books as well then.
There are like multiple. Yeah, it's not good for anyone who was in that castle and was Team
Mhm.
Rhaenyra when she wasn't there.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah,
We
R.I.P.
should
Lord Caswell.
R.I.P. Lord Caswell. We should mention there's a scene with Alicent and Rhaenys where she says, "Look, I know you just publicly swore fealty to Rhaenyra and pledged your children to her, but guess what? I saw this, my husband said this thing that completely upends everything he's been saying for the last 20 years. You should follow me instead." And Rhaenys comes back with something pretty surprising, which is, hey, like, why are you settling for scraps when you could have the meal, Alicent? You know, why are you looking for a window out of the prison when you could walk out the door? Basically, it's cool that Rhaenys has never stopped having her eye on the throne and thinking, like, Alicent assumes like Rhaenys is out of the game, but Rhaenys isn't out of the game yet. I like that
Hmm.
idea.
I didn't even interpret that as like that Rhaenys wants the throne, or that Alicent, or that she thinks that Alicent wants the throne. I think that she's just like fully illuminating Alicent to the fact that she, for however much she believes, like when Alicent is like, we do not rule, but we may guide the men who do. I'm like, that is some self-hating misogyny like mentality, right? Of like, it's not our place to rule, but we may be like the gentle souls behind every great king. There's a woman like attitude. And Rhaenys is just like, what are you talking about? Like, like you are just living your life in service to these men. And for as much as you think that you're like, in my opinion, I was like, okay, so what else could Alicent have done? Like when Rhaenys was confronting her about this. And I was like, I guess if Alicent really wanted to be free, quote unquote, she could have gotten herself out of King's Landing and found Rhaenyra and said, like, your dad told me this crazy shit on his deathbed. Like, I don't know what to do. My dad's been plotting against you this whole time. Like, actually ally herself with women. But Alicent didn't have any of those instincts in place. Instead, it was just like, go straight to my dad, tell him, hand him the gift of knowing that I now believe that Aegon is definitely supposed to be king, and then try to control the situation from there. And she just can't. And like, that's why Rhaenys, I think, popping up at the end is so great, because it's really Rhaenys being like, guess what? This is how you get things done. If like you really want to set yourself free, you imprisoned me in your castle, and guess what? I got free with the help of some good allies and my dragon. So like, peace out,
Yeah,
Alicent.
I would agree that Rhaenys is not angling for the throne or anything like that, but
Yeah.
I do think she's saying to Alicent, like, why are you counting yourself out? Like, don't remove yourself from the game prematurely. Is kind of
Mm,
my interpretation of what she's saying.
mm,
And you should think of yourselves as these people's equals, basically, right? That's kind
yeah.
of what she's encouraging Alicent to think like. So, anyway,
It's a great scene. I love that conversation.
it's
I
great. It's great.
was on the edge of my seat.
Otto and Mysaria meet because the Erics have found out that, through Mysaria's intermediaries, that she knows where Aegon is. So they have a meeting. They give her a bunch of money, and she says, "Hey, you got to stop the child cage matches, and then I'm going to tell you where Aegon is." So it's good that we have some public policy dealings going on during Westeros during this episode, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Gives
and
us a
then
little peek into like Masaria's motivations in operating in this position in Flea Bottom. Because ever since she left Damon, I was sort of like, what are you getting
yeah,
out of this besides just money?
I don't believe this character in its current trajectory is going to be like particularly interesting or critical, but just based on how the show is treating her, So,
Mm-hmm.
so it did feel a little bit perfunctory to me. This idea of like, hey, you have to do this thing. But what I liked about the scene is when Otto agrees to the deal and says, "You have my word," and he says something along the lines of like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm gonna remember this," and I took it to be very threatening. Like one day he's gonna make Mysaria pay for kind of extorting this outcome out of him.
Mm,
Was my interpretation. So I thought that was pretty chilling and well done, personally. But
yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if you had that read, Kim.
Um, I didn't initially, because I just generally assume that Otto's being a little shitster whenever he's making faces.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a really good read on it, especially because the last thing that she says, at least in my notes, was there is no power but what the people allow you to take. And I think Otto was also being like, yeah, I'll keep that in mind, lady. Like, I don't like, she's trying to make a statement about like the importance and power that a
Mm,
collective group can have against a single, and Otto clearly does not buy into that. He thinks that it
yeah.
all can come down to just one or two people.
I had the opposite opinion, right? Which is like,
Oh.
oh yeah, oh don't worry, I'm gonna remember that because
Mm,
that's the thing I'm gonna freaking put down when at the first
Mm.
opportunity that I have. That was kind of my interpretation. Interesting.
Got it. Well,
Uh,
yeah, no, because you're right now that I'm thinking about it, because he's the one who, I mean, I'm assuming it's mostly him and Allison who staged the fact that like all of King's Landing has to come witness it. And guess what? 80,000 people cheering for your new king is a pretty powerful public statement to have like influenced and manipulated. So yeah, I get what you mean.
so we found out that Misari has basically stashed Egon away just for safekeeping, right? And I guess she stashed him in this. Like, what was your interpretation of why he's kind of in this? He's in the sept, right? One of the
Yeah.
septs that we see Alicent and Rhaenyra in earlier on in the season.
Mm-hmm.
And Aegon is underneath that big table that they were praying under over at the beginning of the season. Like, was he just kind of hiding there? Was that kind of your interpretation, or?
I thought it was like he was wasted and she shoved him in like the secret compartment in the
Yeah,
church underneath
yeah.
the prayer candles where like presumably people don't go poking around too often. And like the Erics. What I don't really understand is how like the Eric's left with like the general note of like, oh, he's somewhere in the
He's somewhere
set.
in
Go
the
try
somewhere
to
in the
find
building.
him.
It's like they're playing hide and seek. Playing hide
Right.
and
I'm
seek.
like, you couldn't have been more specific, or like, what if he hadn't coughed at that exact moment? But yeah, they find
Oh,
him and pull him out, and
one other note, by the way, about the Missaria scene before we
yeah.
move completely on from that is, in the show notes you highlight this great line of, you are the mysterious white worm I take it, or are you simply a further peel in this stinking onion? Which is end quote, which is a great line.
Mm-hmm.
It did strike, and you asked the question like, who do you think he was giving him the info? Like my interpretation was he just had never met the white worm, right? And so, and that was actually surprising to me that the white worm would expose herself in that way in the show. Like
Mm.
that's typically a person who you never meet the person, like, and
Yeah.
because there's a lot of power in not being known in a
Yeah.
situation like that. But
No, you're totally right. I'm more inclined to just be annoyed by Otto most of the time. And so when I saw that, I was like, so you're telling me that like your confidential source that you like couldn't possibly disclose to Viserys was like a person that you didn't even know their identity of, Like that all of his like
But
insistence
if I'm
when
putting on my Kim hat, that is, that's not implausible, because maybe to Otto it doesn't matter whether or not it's true or not, right? He's still
right.
going to weaponize that information, right?
Right.
So,
So right. So to me, I was like, this is just one more example that Otto is doing what he's doing, not out of some like truth telling, pious, I must, my king, tell you that like your daughter was seen with Damon in the brothel, but like, oh yeah, I'm using every morsel of information I can get to disrupt the relationship between Viserys and Rhaenyra.
yeah,
So that was my read on the fact that apparently until this episode, he did not know who Miss Arya really was. And then, yeah, that's all.
So the Erics drag Aegon out. There's a great line that one of them says,
Hmm.
"You flee what other men die seeking." End quote. Great line. I don't know if that's from the
Mhm.
books, but it's an awesome line.
Mm-mm.
And it's a signal to the fact that Aegon obviously doesn't want to be king. He's like, let me go away on a boat. You'll never see me again. A fight ensues between Alicent's men and Otto's men. Alicent's men triumph. Eric, the one with the E, is like, "F this! I'm not even doing this. I'm not giving my life for this guy." Which is just, it's a cool. I agree, it's a cool moment. I think, it's not. We just met these characters basically this episode. One
Yeah.
of them last episode, right? But or the episode before, but like
Yeah.
it
That
doesn't
was
make much
Eric
of
with an E.
yes, it
Because
doesn't make
he's
much of an
privy to.
emotional. Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, again, we know that's Eric with an E because he was the one who was privy to the fact that Aegon had assaulted this serving girl and had to go like tell the queen. So again, he's had this like up close view to the effect that Aegon is having on the people around him and how terrible it is. So yes. Anyways. But I agree that it's loosely threaded in there. So it
Right.
feels a little wonky when you're watching it the first time through in this episode.
It didn't make a huge emotional impact on me, but it's kind of a cool moment when the guy's just like, "Peace, I'm out." Like this is a fun thing to have happen.
Yeah.
But anyway, they get him, they drag him back to Alicent, and Alicent then like theoretically controls the situation from that point forward. She has a confrontation with Otto where he says, "Well played," and they kind of talk as equals for once, and he tries to insist that he had her best interests in mind, and she's like, "No, you were just kind of using me this whole time," which she's absolutely right about everything. And the one question I had, Kim, was: do you have a sense of that this would have necessarily played out differently if Otto had gotten Aegon first? Because Allison's priority is, hey, everyone's got to see Aegon crowned as soon as possible. We have to have the illusion of power as quickly as possible. And I think Otto probably would have done something similar. So that was the only thing where I was like, like I wonder if this is all a bunch of hullabaloo for nothing. But I do think that I am compelled by the idea that Allison needs to control the situation, and so she does get that. But would Otto have done something different with Aegon? Do you think? Like he sends the Eric's away very sinisterly to get them. But
Right.
I don't know if he had any other plans. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know, other than maybe knowing that Alicent was a little bit of a loose cannon at the moment, and he really wanted to be in full control of her children. I think that the reason why, I honestly think it all comes down to Rhaenyra and
Yeah,
Alicent thinking about Rhaenyra. And so
I'm reading your notes right now, and it all makes sense. Yeah, it's totally a Rhaenyra thing. You finished what you're saying, but yes, that's clearly the reason. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that she knows that if she has Aegon, she can get Otto to back off from this, go send murderers right this second to Dragonstone to handle this situation.
Yes.
Because, yeah. So.
Again, sorry, folks. We're just fresh off watching the episode. Usually Kim and I do a Twitter space on Sunday nights, and I work out these kind of temporary misunderstandings. But yes, it's clearly Rhaenyra. She says that they're going to send terms to Rhaenyra at Dragonstone that she can accept without shame. So basically, Alicent has probably saved Rhaenyra's life by getting control of Aegon first, right?
Thinks that she is saving because it's like she doesn't know how Rhaenyra is going to respond to those terms. Like, even if she believes,
but at least there's a chance. There's a chance that,
yes,
like, I mean, in the flip side, it would be like, Otto sends his men and they like infiltrate Rhaenyra's base and they kind of just kill her right off the bat. That's the alternative, right? So
pulls out the Westerosi credit card and hires a faceless man, and
exactly, exactly, aka Larys. But anyway, so okay, yeah, I apologize. It's clearly the Rhaenyra thing. That's what's going on. And so then it's like, hey, we gotta crown this guy king as quickly as possible, and then get the show on the road. Let's talk about the Larys scene before we take a break and then go to the end of the episode. Larys shows up. There's this amazing moment when Alicent walks into her own chambers and she is freaking exhausted. She's like, I have had the day from hell. I've had the longest day. Freaking Larys shows up. It's like, oh my gosh, like whatever you have to say is not going to be amusing or enjoyable for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, but to be fair, Larys has some good information. She's like, hey, he's like, hey, there's a network of spies, and they're
You're
giving
just
away.
Now figuring this out, Larys.
They're giving away information, including from you to Otto, and like they're undermining your authority. Blah blah blah. So, including Talia, right? The woman who's like been going to the White Worm, and I guess she's going to the White Worm, and then the White Worm is then selling the information back to Otto in like a huge,
when it's convenient, when it's strategic
of communication, telephone communication.
Yeah.
And so Larys, Alicent's like, okay, can you take care of this for me? Meaning like actually kill people for me. And Larys is like, I could, but what are you going to do for me? And then we see what that is. So what do you make of this scene, Kim? What do you make of this scene?
This was one of those scenes where like she takes off her shoes, right? And I was like,
I was like, what is going on? What is with the socks and the shoes? Right.
Yeah. I was like, okay, interesting, whatever. But like, we've all done that, right? Long ass day, you get home, you take off your shoes, feels nice. So I was like, okay, maybe I just registered that weirdly. And then she puts them on the edge of the table.
Right.
And I was like, again, interesting. But, they're just having a little convo. We know she has dinners with him. She's just like relaxing. And then she starts taking off her stockings. And I was like, no. I was like, that can't be necessary right now. And then he like put his hand in his pants. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is happening. Look, no ill will towards anyone who enjoys feet. It's not about that. It's like the look on her face while it's happening, and the clear like quid pro quo okay, I'll do you a favor, my queen, as long as I can jerk off to the vision of your feet on your couch in your own bedroom. Like,
Yeah,
just, uh,
I think it's a wonderful Game of Thrones esque, you know, weird, messed up situation. I have to say, I was a little bit. Um, I have qualms about the fact that Laris is the only disabled character in the show, basically, or what
mm,
him and Aemond are the differently abled characters, and e- I think it's shot and done in including like Allison's opinion on the whole situation. It's done in such a way that I think we as the audience are supposed to perceive what Laris is doing as off-putting. These are
yeah,
not they're not two people who are indulging in each other's kinks in a sex positive way.
yeah,
This is like, oh, Laris is a deviant, basically. Is kind of the way it's shot, in my opinion, the dynamic of the scene.
yeah,
And I don't like that he's like, it's like it's almost like connected to his disability because they have a close up on his foot that's a little bit like Kaiser Soze and Usual Suspects, like in terms of the angle of it,
yeah,
and
uh-huh,
it's I just it made me uncomfortable a little bit that like that that specific character has this specific kink and it's depicted in this specific way,
yeah.
um anyway, take of
And
that what you will, but yeah.
and revealed to us in this episode as a like it the way that it unfolds makes me think that this is just how these interactions have been going for a while, that like, this isn't the first time. And so I'm
Right.
like, the choice to insert that into this episode, again, something that very much surprised me, and then I was just like, yeah, there's a lot to read in to that choice.
Indeed. Indeed. All right, more to say about the ending of this episode in a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll have more to say about season 1, episode 9 of House of the Dragon. There is a cool montage with some beautiful music of you see all the characters getting no sleep, and I do feel the weight of history on these characters. You know, you do get a sense that whatever the next move is going to be incredibly consequential,
Mm-hmm.
and I like that about the scene. And then the next day happens, and they're off to the coronation. They're in this mobile carriage, I guess, to carry Aegon off, and Aegon and Alicent have an interaction about what's going on. It's really awkward, obviously, but Alicent explains, like, I saw it in the prophecy, and Aegon rightly calls out, that makes absolutely no sense. He had 20 years to change his mind. He didn't. Um, and Aegon is right. Now, here's the question I had all episode, Kim, is because have you seen Breaking Bad?
Most of it.
There's spoilers for Breaking Bad, not Better Call Saul, but in Breaking Bad, there's a scene where Jesse's girlfriend starts like choking on her own vomit.
Oh
You
yeah,
remember
yeah,
that
I
scene?
saw
And then
that
like
one.
Walter White like lets her die,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a horrifying scene. And it's like, oh, there's gonna be some comeuppance for this. There's gonna be some, you know, Jesse's probably going to find out at some point that Walt was responsible, right? And that does,
Right.
that does in fact happen.
There's like
Spoilers,
tension from that point
there's tension for that.
forward.
It's like, is he ever going to find out? Like they've seeded that in. Is he ever going to find out? Um, but in that show, it's like very clear the way he's going to find out is uh, Walter White's going to tell him somehow, and that is in fact what ends up happening. This show, I'm watching the show. I'm like, is Alicent ever going to find out she was wrong about the prophecy? Now you
Mm.
may. I think the prophecy scene doesn't even happen in the book, right? Like where she, as you said,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. This
Yeah.
has all been a show invention.
Yeah. So in the books, it's not even like she misunderstands the prophecy in the book. So the whole time I'm wondering, is Alicent, is there even a mechanism for Alicent to find out that she was wrong? And in this scene, he's like, she says, "Here, you can have this blade." I'm like, holy crap! Like, is he gonna like see the prophecy and say, "Oh, he met Aegon the Conqueror" when he's, like, I'm curious, like, if there's ever going to be a reckoning for that. I hope there is. I hope there is a reckoning for Rhaenyra's children not belonging to Laenor, and her misreading the prophecy. Like, these are things that should be paid off later, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah,
dagger is the way to do it. Right?
totally.
Like theoretically, yeah.
Totally.
So
It's the plot device sitting right there. And I, again, I think that this episode, including everything that we've already talked about with Alicent and now like this dagger and stuff, like some little qualms I was having with like the adaptation choices that they were making, or just like a little bit of confusion as to like, I wonder why that particular thing happened. The dagger and the fire thing, when it first happened, I was like, that seems a little hammy to me, or like a little too Lord of the Rings language of Mordor inscribed on the ring that can only be revealed by fire type of vibe. And then this was when I was like, oh, it's a piece of evidence that this misunderstanding is a misunderstanding, and
Right.
Rhaenyra knows about it. And
Mm.
now that dagger is sitting on
Mm.
little sex pest king's waist. So
Yeah.
like I do hope that there is some payoff for the fact that they planted that, because otherwise the whole dagger having the prophecy thing on it is going to continue to kind of feel excessive to me in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like really trying to carry this through line between House of the Dragon to Game of Thrones.
This is the kind of downside of making it a misunderstanding, though. Is like, let's say it is revealed to Alicent that she was wrong about the prophecy. It's like, oh, whoopsie, like, whoops. That's kind of what the reaction, as opposed to her like affirmatively making the decision somehow and then seeing the wrongness of her ways morally or ethically or
Right.
tactically or whatever. It's just, oh, it was a whoopsie daisy. Like, I misunderstood. Like, I
No,
do
yeah.
want her to realize she's wrong, but because it's a misunderstanding, I don't know if it's going to be satisfying, because it's like, okay, she made a mistake. Like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There is a tragedy in knowing that, like, oh, we could have been friends this whole time, Rhaenyra, if I hadn't made this mistake. But it's like, her mistake is not unreasonable, like, in my
No,
opinion.
yeah. That's I totally agree. Part of me wanted them to go the narrative that we get in Fire and Blood just says that like Alicent wanted her son to be king and therefore she fought like hell to make it happen, type of thing. And while I also don't love like mother crazy protective of her children trope, I there's a version of the show where Alicent just truly believes in all of this stuff and is in on it with Otto to supplant or to skip over Rhaenyra as even a potential successor, and then realizes that that was not the right thing to do, or realizes that she might have taken it too far and has to genuinely contend with that. Whereas, yes, I think that the misunderstanding makes her character a little more likable, or like, I don't think likable is the right word. I take that back, but like makes her character a little more,
Tragic? Yeah,
yes, and sympathetic
Yeah.
in the tragedy, as opposed
Mhm.
to like this was a tragedy of her own making. It's a
Right.
tragedy that she was forced into and is
It
now trying
removes
to
some, like, culpability from her in
yes,
in in the events, right?
that's a good
Yeah.
way to put it. Yeah.
All right. Well, Eric with an E has had a crisis of conscience and gotten Rhaenys out from her chambers. Uh, and whisked her out away. This is the same pathway that Damon used to get Rhaenyra out of the Red Keep, if I recall correctly, right?
Yeah,
Si-
same secret passageway, and it's the same in episode 6 when Rhaenyra went and overheard Harwin Strong talking to Lionel Strong and having that argument about their children. That's also the same passageway, but Rhaenyra just went up it to go to that
Mhm.
place where Harwin was. Whereas if you go down, it's this path that leads past the dragon skull and out to that little escape into King's Landing. Exactly.
Yeah, and if I am, if I'm recalling something you said earlier, Kim, one of the things you said that I thought was interesting was, I mean, most of the things you say are interesting. 99% of the things you say are interesting,
Thank you
and the
so much.
1% is the impressions, which are just amusing. Um,
Great.
the But you had said, that the egg. There was this king that was bad, right? What was he? What was his name?
Maegor the Cruel.
Maegor the Cruel,
Yeah.
right? And he had like hired all these people who were like had built the Red Keep with the secret passageways, and he like killed them all so that they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't get out.
Mm-hmm.
It actually, I got flashbacks to that when Laris was giving his speech this week about like there's a network of spies here, and maybe I'll, who knows how many of them will be executed, right? But it's just the idea that you're like surrounded by all these people that know this information that you don't want them to know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't know if I didn't know if the show was calling back to that idea at all or referring to that idea at all.
I think it is. And in general, like why we even have the accounts that we do in Fire and Blood through George's story is the idea that there are literally people like in the walls, under the floors, in secret passageways who might be privy to private interactions between people or small council meetings and stuff who shouldn't know what they know. And the fact that that itself is its own little secret. Like the fact that Magor kept all of those secret passageways and stuff hidden from as many people as possible makes it a very inside, secretive, you know, MI6 level operation of spydom in King's Landing and in the Red Keep specifically.
Well, they get Rhaenys out through the passageways, and I guess they're herding people through the streets towards the coronation, is kind of my sense, right? And then there's this moment when she sees the destination where they're herding everyone through, and she gets a smile on her face because she realizes that they're doing the coronation in the Dragon Pit. And this is actually a detail from the books, right, Kim? Like the coronation did in fact take place in the Dragon Pit. Not clear in the show why they chose that location. I guess maybe because it's really large, and so might as well. But
it says in the books that it seats like 80,000 people. And I looked it up, and I think Madison Square Garden is 20,000. So it's like 4 Madison Square Gardens worth of people in King's Landing. That's a lot of people to like make witness. Like, I think by having as many witnesses as possible to the coronation, they are all going to hear what Otto says, which is that it was King Viserys' dying wish that Aegon ascend the throne and like all that stuff. They're basically just trying to shore up the legitimacy of this power play right here.
So they get everyone in the Dragon Pit, and it's time for the coronation. Otto gets on stage and he says, Viserys the Peaceful is dead, and his dying wish was for Aegon to succeed him. And you kind of hear people being like, murmurs, and then people are like, okay, yeah, why not? Why not? You know,
sounds
all right,
great.
I believe you. You know, they start clapping, and then it's time to crown Aegon king. And I actually really like the sequence. All the knights lined up with the swords, and they use slow motion, which is not something they do very often in Game of Thrones. Almost never, as far as I can recall. Very, very rarely do they use slow motion in Game of Thrones.
Jon Snow with the horses,
right? Exactly,
was the last like notable time that I can think. Yeah,
it's not like they never used it, but it's not common, I would say. So it's for very big moments.
Yeah,
the music is beautiful. It looks amazing. Yeah. Any thoughts on like this whole sequence before we get to the big reveal at the end?
Yeah, just a neat little detail that they seem to have included is that the trumpet sound that they make to like announce that this coronation is happening is the same melody that was used for King Robert's arrival in the Game of Thrones pilot. Like that track that Ramin Djawadi made is literally called The King's Arrival. And so I was like, oh, like they're kind of implying that like this is just the King's song that we've been using for centuries type of vibe, which I thought was fun.
Amazing pull, Kim. Amazing pull.
Thanks.
So Aegon walks through the crowd. There's people all around him, and he gets to the top of the stairs, and it's the ceremony to like, I guess it's a maester or someone that's kind of drawing stuff on his face. And it actually, again, talking about the Crown parallels in the Netflix original series The Crown, like they show the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in that show as well, and it's similar vibes of like it's both a religious sort of event as well as like a political event, and and you get that sense from this scene, right?
Yeah, and again, that's very Hightower of them to combine the ceremony of the faith and like have a septon doing part of the ceremony, and then also have it be like in the Dragon Pit. Like it's a very strategic. We're blending Targaryen tradition with the faith tradition here. Look at this, blonde-haired, clearly very Targaryen person. We're putting the crown of the Conqueror on his head. He has the Conqueror's sword in his hand, that Blackfire sword that he has as a Valyrian steel sword. It's one of the most famous Valyrian steel swords because Aegon the Conqueror once used it. So like they're doing everything they can to symbolically imply that like this is the correct course of action. And then of course it literally blows up in their face.
Yeah, I mean, a quick note about the sword too. He does get the dagger. It's a sword or a dagger? Because
sorry. So the Valyrian dagger was like Viserys's little special prophecy dagger, but his actual long sword is called Blackfire. It's also a Valyrian steel blade. Okay. So he's double bladed.
There's a scene, but in the carriage when he's talking with Allison, he
Yeah.
is really excited when he gets the dagger, right? And then, but it's clear that all he wants, Kim Renfro, is the love, affection, and approval of his mom and dad. You know, if you really think
Mm.
about it, hurt
Hmm.
people, hurt people. You know, is
Hurt
really
people get excited when a crowd of 80,000 people cheer for them
yeah. There is a
because
nice
they didn't get enough love from mommy and daddy.
there is a nice moment when he gets up there on the stage and he is very reluctant. The whole episode, 99% of the episode, he is extremely reluctant to be taking part in this entire charade. And he gets up there and he's still looking unhappy, but then he turns around and he sees that he has the affection of the people. And like everyone, we hope that a newly crowned ruler will recognize the power of their office, you know,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
recognize the awesome responsibility that's been placed upon them.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, he seems to just be really happy that they're all cheering for him and they're all having a blast. So the final piece of the episode, while Rhaenys is hanging out there, she watches like the first half of the movie, and then she's like, I have other things I got to do. So then she like escapes downstairs to the dragon pit. I guess they had like the dragon armor was like is stored with the dragons, right? So she puts that on, and then she bursts out the top of the middle of the crowd, killing presumably hundreds of people,
Hundreds
from
of
what we
people.
can tell. Now, okay, so is this from the books? Let me start. Let me start with that question. Like, is this a thing that happened in the books?
No.
Okay. I guess if it's possible for you to explain without spoiling anything, like, does Rhaenys make it out of? Was Rhaenys here at King's Landing at the time that this occurred? Like, did any of this happen in the books? You know, does Rhaenys like make it out alive and she just got out some in another way? Like, I'm kind of curious. To what extent can you explain what happened in the books versus what's in the show?
This is a really good question, David Chen,
Okay.
that I don't have an easy answer to because
Okay.
I've been doing this thing with our podcast where I try not to read ahead
Uh
too
huh.
much.
You
And
mean
so
reread ahead because you've already read it, obviously.
reread ahead
Yeah. Yes.
because I do that every week after I finish the episodes and stuff. Um so no, as far as I can remember, this rainy situation I think was orchestrated for the show in order to have that. I think that the scene between her and Alicent is very important when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to what all of the women characters are doing in the show and how they're relating to one another. Um and it's like, if you weren't quite like, I think that it's obviously very deliberate that we don't see Rhaenyra or Daemon this entire episode. So
Yeah.
in addition to all of like the sort of like thrilling setup, time pressure of getting Aegon, I also spent the whole episode being like, okay, who are they going to show us is getting out of here to go tell
Right.
someone on Team Rhaenyra and Daemon what's going on? Because obviously there's no way for them to know because they aren't physically here anymore. Um, and that I think was also part of the setup of last episode with Lord Corlys of like, we've now seen from the other side what it's like if someone is sick and dying far away and you are trying to like strategize and find information about what's going on without getting all the facts of like, how dead is he? Is he really dead? What were his final wishes on his deathbed type of thing? So yeah, to me, I've just, as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, this is how they're getting Rhaenys out
Mm-hmm.
so that she
Mm-hmm.
can go give them the detailed information. She was locked in her room. She saw all the lords being gathered, like she has so much information that she now can take to Rhaenyra and Daemon. So my interpretation was that was all show invention in order to get us a really solid character who we trust, the audience, who will be able to go and now deliver an account of what happened to the one true queen, Rhaenyra.
As I've already explained, I really loved this episode, and most of it is structured like a political thriller almost, where you're racing against time. It reminded me of like, I don't know, um, uh, Blowout, or
Mm.
De Palma's Blowout, or Manchurian Candidate, or what else was I thinking of?
The Princess Diaries too.
Valkyrie, you know, like the Chris McQuarrie movie, like all these movies where you're like you're trying to like get control of the situation as quickly as possible, and so so I liked all that. I am torn about the ending. I'm torn about the ending, and obviously she busts out of the ground. It's a spectacular. She looks totally badass in the armor and everything like that, and like, you know, and it's satisfying because she was uh imprisoned by these people, and
Yeah.
so possibly her life was in jeopardy because who knows what they were going to do to her, right?
Right.
So for her to get out of this is like very, very good and satisfying because she's basically an innocent, right, in this whole situation. But then she kind of confronts these people, and they're waiting for her to Dracarys them, and then she doesn't, and then she flies away. And I watched the after the episode discussion about this, and I think it was Ryan Condal. The after the episode stuff, I assume, is recorded months ago or weeks, months ago, like long time before the show ever airs. And you could tell he was getting ready for all the criticism about this scene. Because he's like, okay, like I think it's gonna be a controversial scene, you know, like it's gonna be a controversial scene that this happens. Because why does Rhaenys not kill these people? A lot of people who are watching the show don't like the Greens. And also they've done terrible things in this episode alone, and Aegon's a terrible ruler, and also she's willing to kill hundreds of innocent people. Why not kill these people that will actually prevent death moving forward, end the war right there? What do you think, Kim?
What are my thoughts? Thought you'd never ask. I was sitting here being like, how many answers do I have to this? So first of all, I agree that upon a first watch, I was like, oh, that was a lot of people that you just murdered, Rhaenys. That doesn't really seem cool. We talk a lot about like the value of human life for all of these like different characters. It's very bad when Daemon just like kills people willy-nilly. We shouldn't like it when Rhaenys doesn't either. And yet I was like, that was so cool. I kind of immediately forgave her. And then I was like, what is the strategy here? I think her primary drive is like, get me out of here. Get me and my dragon safely out of here, right? Because earlier in the episode, she says, like, she's asking about Melis, her dragon. Because to leave a dragon behind, like, if she were to be imprisoned or escape some other way, but, like, leave her dragon, that would be a huge loss to her personally, but also in terms of just, like, literal power of being on whatever side of this impending conflict is coming. And I also think that to the same point of why the coronation happened in the dragon pit, why she couldn't let the story start to run wild through the kingdom, that she showed up out of nowhere for no apparent reason and killed the named heir by Viserys himself in the middle or like right after his coronation. You know, like the public perception of her murdering them by dragon fire in that moment would have way more would have fallout basically for the case that Rhaenyra should be queen, because everybody just heard from the trusted decades-long hand of the king and Queen Alicent herself that Viserys' dying wish was that his true-born son Aegon, who you've all been celebrating for the last 20 years because you're small folk who, like, we saw their plays that they had even when Aegon was like a baby. Like, the people of Flea Bottom were like, yeah, boo Rhaenyra, we want the man. So, like, she's working against decades of public perception, basically, and I think that move was just like strategic to show a lot of power to Team Green, to the Greens, of like, just so you know, I could have just executed you all very easily because you're all dummies who don't use your dragons, and we are the dragon riders and the blood of Valyria and all that jazz. And then it was just, I think maybe also like woman to woman, like, I'll give you one more chance, Alicent, to actually be a fine political strategist. I don't want to murder you right now.
That's the reason they gave in the after the show, is like, it was, she didn't want to murder a mother. It was one mother. I know. I did not like that explanation either.
I don't like that.
That was very unsatisfying to me. You know.
No.
But that was the explanation I thought. I actually agreed with you, Kim, when I first saw it. I was like, politically, it's a bad thing. Yes, you had to murder hundreds of people, but killing murdering the just crowned king, who, by the way, people had just started to like, that
Right.
would have been beyond the pale.
Right.
I did take a screenshot. You saw I sent this to you of like when she's about to burst up. I'll link to this in the show notes. But when she's about to burst up into the crowd, you can see all these people rapturously applauding the new king, and there's this one guy that just has his arms crossed, and he's looking very unimpressed, and he's like, I didn't vote for this guy. Like he's very much not on, he's very much hashtag Team Rhaenyra, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hilarious that they kind of sprinkled that guy in the episode. So
Yeah, that's a
um
great catch. I love that. Something similar happened to me with Stranger Things one season where like there was a bunch of people protesting the mall and it was all like legitimate, like they're ruining our tiny economy, all this stuff. And then one guy in the background had a sign that just said the pretzels aren't even that good. And I was like, yes, that's the energy I want from one random extra in the background scene. So Mr. The mall pretzels aren't even that good in the Dragon Pit died minutes later, seconds later after that screenshot. Wasn't that screenshot like right before she
like
explodes?
literally like 2 seconds before. There is a moment when Otto has to say like, hey, open the doors, because I guess they're trying to close the doors to keep the dragon from escaping, right? Is kind of,
I think that's
what my interpretation was, right?
Yeah.
And then he's like, no, open the doors, because otherwise she's just going to kill us all, pretty much, right? So
right, then we're all sitting ducks. And clearly she wants out.
She wants to get out,
so,
right? So
yeah.
But anyway, she flies off. It's a pretty spectacular escape, and she's going to go warn Rhaenyra of what's going on, and that is where the episode ends in a rather shocking manner. So I loved the ending of the episode as kind of a visceral experience, but yeah, it did. I think some people may have qualms about it. Certainly, the showrunner was expecting that they might, apparently.
Yeah.
That she would spare these people, right? Like that's the thing that I think people have a lot of problems with.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Kim Renfro, about season 1, episode
9? I just, in case anybody listening isn't aware of this dynamic that Game of Thrones kind of set into, like, created a pattern of instead of saving like the most like monumentous, epic, beautifully rendered like battle episode for their finale, they started always doing it in the penultimate episode. It's always the 9th episode until, of course, we get to the later seasons, which were shorter. And so I thought again that this is a really cool example of doing that type of episode where it feels very emotionally charged. It feels very like tense, but like there wasn't necessarily a ton of quote unquote action until the very end. And I just like that feeling of like, oh, okay, are they just kind of going to go with like a more like internal political drama vibe? And then to get like the surprise dragon action, hundreds of people being killed, it's all chaos, I thought was like a great emotional peak to leave the episode on and to kind of set their own pace for how they might do these penultimate episodes.
I tweeted about this episode and how much I loved it, and somebody tweeted back just now, it's a funny comment. They said, quote, I felt bad for all the peasants that died for no reason. They get shuffled to this impromptu coronation. They cheer as directed, then die in tons of rubble as a dragon bursts through the floor. Use the garage door, ma'am. No need to murder innocents on the way out. End quote.
Yeah, that was a rough morning for the people of King's Landing.
They probably were living a fairly miserable life. Or miserable lives. Then it's like, hey, guess what? You've been invited to this exclusive event, coronation. Oh my gosh, amazing! And then followed by just this most surprising, brutal death ever. It's really
How about
really
we go with like my headcanon now is going to be that all the people that were right in the middle of that, the general admission only seating for the coronation, that those were all the people who had like come fresh off of a child cage match. And like it's okay if they get exploded and die.
That's your headcanon now.
Like, that's who those people were. Rhaenys was just doing us a favor.
I'm gonna say one other thing, which is like, Kim, you and I are recording this literally minutes after the episode finished airing. And this has been my favorite episode of the season, possibly, if not the favorite, then one of my favorite. But I do think that the reaction has been pretty polarized so far.
Really? See, I haven't absorbed any of that either.
Well, I've gotten some tweets from people saying this is the worst episode of the season, so I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then The Ringer published an article entitled "The 5 Ways That Episode 9 of House of the Dragon Underwhelmed." Just now. So I say all this because typically when we record, we have
Yeah.
already like all this stuff has already come out and we've already processed it all and like have thoughts to share about it. But I do think like the perception of this episode will become more clear to us as the week goes on, and we'll probably talk about it in a bonus episode that we'll release later. But
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting that it's such a polarizing episode when you and I rarely are this enthusiastic at the same
Yeah.
time about an episode.
Look at us
Um,
go.
but it's not necessarily universal. So anyway, uh, I'm gonna get pretty. You might hear me repeating the same points multiple times in the next few episodes about this topic, which the topic being Kim Renfro. And I just wanted to say, like we are at episode 9. There's one more episode that remains. Plus, we're gonna do a bonus episode, but um, we're really rapidly approaching the kind of end of our journey this season, and I do just want to say thank you, and I'm going to say thank you like multiple more times, and I'll try to be unobtrusive about it. So I'm putting it at the very end of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
But when Joanna went off to podcast for the Ringer, and it was like, oh, there is my initial reaction was there is no Cast of Kings without Joanna Robinson. Like she is the reason why people tune into a Cast of Kings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful to be along for the ride, but like she is the star of the show, and so she was gone, and I didn't. It was literally huge doubts as to whether this podcast would continue. Like massive. Um, it was not at all a sure thing that we would be doing this season of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But Kim Renfro randomly took a call from this weird guy, David Chen, that she literally never had a conversation with in her entire life. And I was like, "Hey, do you want to come do a Cast of Kings podcast with me?" And she was open and receptive to it. And regardless of what people think about me on this podcast, I think it's unquestionable that tens of thousands of people have benefited enormously from your expertise on the show, and have been enriched and enlightened uh, and laughed about it and cried about it, and it's because Kim was willing to take a chance on the podcast, take a chance on me, and come be a co-host on the podcast. So I just wanted to say, like, as we come to the end of the journey, I'm very grateful to have gone through it with you, Kim. It's been wonderful to get to know you. You've been a dream co-host, and I hope you've had a great time.
I have, honestly. Thank you so much. Because as much as you make it sound like I took a chance on you, but you took a huge chance on me too. I was an untested regular podcast host for anything, and you've been incredibly just awesome to work with, and to learn how you do what you do so wonderfully and see the whole network that you've built. And it is truly my honor to get to be any sort of piece of it. So thank you for finding me and helping me do this. I literally wouldn't be here without you.
So anyway, we'll have more to say about that next week,
Yeah.
probably, because
I know I'm gonna get all sentimental.
Mhm.
How is it already over?
Yeah, I know, but it's been a wonderful ride, and thanks to everyone who has stuck with us, and thanks to Kim for doing this, because really, yeah, it's been a intense time of transition for the podcast, but grateful that we've got to have it. So, okay, we'll talk more about it next week. But in the meantime, just wanted to say thank you. And you can find more episodes of this podcast at acastofkings.com. Email us at acastofkings@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Acast of Kings. And check out podcast.decodingtv.com, because we're recapping other shows there. Kim Renfro is not a co-host on the shows, but there are other experts of other topics on those shows.
Great array of people that you've got over there, for sure.
And more on the way. So I look forward to that as well. But In the meantime, she is Kim Renfro. I am David Chen. We'll see you next week for our recap of the season finale of House of the Dragon.
Bye.
Thanks for watching that video from A Cast of Kings. To get the podcast version of the show, go to acastofkings.com. A Cast of Kings is part of the Decoding TV podcast network. Check out the flagship podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Get cool bonuses at decodingtv.com. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more videos.